Last time, I promised you another everyday machine you've never really looked inside. Well, here it is. It's probably 10 feet from you right now, humming away in your kitchen. The microwave. You've used it thousands of times. Press the buttons, wait, the food gets hot, and I'd bet you have never once wondered what's actually happening in there. Here's why you should. Almost everything people think they know about how a microwave works is wrong. You've heard it cooks food from the inside out. It doesn't. That's backwards. You've heard it's tuned to the special resonant frequency of water. It isn't. It's nowhere close. And if it were, your dinner would come out burnt on the outside and frozen solid in the middle. So if it's not doing either of those things, then what is it doing? That's what we're going to figure out. And the real answer is stranger and a whole lot cooler than the myths. There's a piece of World War II radar hiding in there. There's an invisible pattern of hot and cold spots, and there's a door doing a clever little trick right in front of your eyes. Let's open it up. No hype, no doom, just how it works. Let's start with the big one, the myth you've definitely heard. The microwave cooks from the inside out. It's everywhere, even in school textbooks. And it's just not true. Here's what actually happens. When those microwaves hit your food, they don't sail straight through to the middle. They get soaked up right near the surface, in the outer layer, the outer inch or so. So the outside heats up first. Then that heat has to travel inward the slow, ordinary way, by conduction. The warm outer layer heats the layer beneath it, and so on, creeping toward the center one step at a time. Which is exactly how a regular oven does it too. So in a microwave, the center of your food isn't the first place to get hot. It's usually the last. And that's the real reason for the cold middle. You pull out a lasagna, edges bubbling, and the very center is still an icy little brick. That's not a malfunction. It's just the heat not having finished its trip inward. So why does the myth feel true? 2 reasons. There's no hot air browning the surface, so the outside can look cool, even when it isn't. And a juicy, sugary core, like the jam in a donut, soaks up energy fast and turns scalding. So the inside feels hotter than you expected, but it was never heated first. Okay, so the microwaves get soaked up in that outer layer. But how does that turn into heat? This is the part most explanations get wrong, so let me get it right. The secret is water. Your food is full of it, and a water molecule is lopsided. A little positive on one end, a little negative on the other. Scientists call that a dipole. Picture a tiny compass needle with a plus end and a minus end. A microwave is really just an electric field that flips back and forth incredibly fast, about 2.5 billion times every second. And every time it flips, it grabs those water dipoles and tries to twist them into line. In liquid water, though, the molecules are packed in tight, shoulder to shoulder. They can't spin freely. They lag behind, they stumble, and they bump and jostle their neighbors trying to keep up. All that bumping and jostling, that's the heat. The push from the field gets scrambled into random molecular motion, and that's exactly what heat is. Physicists call this dielectric loss. Now, 2 things, because nearly everyone gets them wrong. This is not resonance. Hold that thought, it's the next myth. And it's not really friction, not like 2 surfaces rubbing. It's more like a packed room where everyone turns around at once and keeps knocking into each other. Fats and sugars do a little of this too, which is why they heat up fast, but water is the real star. Now let's bust that second myth. Here's the myth that even smart people repeat. A microwave runs at 2.45 gigahertz, and that, they say, is the resonant frequency of water, the magic note that makes water molecules sing. It sounds satisfying, and it's completely false. Water has no resonance anywhere near that frequency. None. If you go looking for where water absorbs energy most strongly, you have to travel far higher. Its big absorption peak is up around 20 gigahertz, and its true resonances are higher still, way up in the infrared. So it isn't water's magic note. It isn't even close to the peak. And thank goodness for that, Because remember, if 2.45 really were the frequency water grabs onto hardest, the microwaves would get soaked up instantly in the very first millimeter. Your food would sear black on the outside and stay frozen stone cold in the middle. A resonance would be a disaster. So why 2.45 then? The real answer isn't physics magic. It's engineering, plus a little paperwork. That frequency sits in a band regulators worldwide set aside, license-free, for exactly this kind of job. So a microwave can blast away at it without a special permit. It also soaks into food a useful few centimeters deep instead of just scorching the skin. And the parts are cheap and well understood. A license-free band, a good soak-in depth, and cheap components. Not a secret frequency of water, just a practical, slightly boring, brilliant engineering choice. So something inside that box is making these microwaves. It's a gadget called a magnetron. Maybe my favorite part of the whole story, because you're reheating your leftovers with a piece of World War II. It was radar tech. During the war, it let ships and aircraft fire out microwave beams to spot the enemy in the dark. Here's roughly how it works. In the middle, a hot electrode boils off a steady stream of electrons. Those electrons want to fly straight outward, but a magnet sits right there, and its field bends their path, whipping them into tight, looping spirals. And as they sweep past a ring of little cavities, they set them humming. That humming is the microwave at about 2.45 gigahertz. A small antenna picks it up, and a channel called a waveguide funnels it into the cooking box. So how did a wartime radar part become a kitchen appliance? Well, as the story goes, back in 1945, an engineer named Percy Spencer was standing beside a running magnetron and noticed a candy bar in his pocket had melted. Curious, he tried popcorn. It popped. He tried an egg. It exploded. His company, Raytheon, put the pieces together and built the first commercial microwave a couple of years later. It was the size of a fridge and cost a small fortune. It took decades to shrink into the box on your counter, but the heart of it, that spiraling electron radar tube, is still in there.
Now, once those microwaves pour into the metal box, something happens that explains one of the most annoying things about microwaving. The inside is metal, and metal reflects microwaves like a mirror. So the waves don't just hit your food once and stop. They bounce off the walls, the ceiling, the floor, crisscrossing back and forth. And when waves overlap like that, they interfere. In some spots, two waves pile up and reinforce into an intense hot spot. In others, they cancel out, and you get a cold spot where barely anything happens. This builds a fixed, invisible pattern of hot and cold zones standing right there in the air. Hot, cold, spaced roughly a few inches apart, about half a wavelength. And that's exactly why your food heats so unevenly. One bite is molten lava, the next still cold, because they sat in different zones. Here's a fun thing you can try. Take the turntable out, lay a bar of chocolate flat, and run it a few seconds. You'll watch it melt in a row of evenly spaced patches, the hot zones made visible. And if you measure the gap between those patches, you can calculate the speed of light right there in your kitchen. Your microwave is secretly a little physics lab. Which brings us to the humble turntable. And now you finally know what it's actually for. It's not there just to look cute. It's there to solve the hot and cold spot problem. Because that hot and cold pattern is basically stuck in place, the engineers can't easily make it go away. So instead of fixing the pattern, they do the next best thing. They move your food through it. The turntable slowly drags your plate around, so every part of your meal takes turns in the hot zones and the cold zones. The scorching spots and the dead spots average out over the trip, and your food heats far more evenly than it would sitting still. Some microwaves don't have a visible turntable at all. Instead, they hide a little spinning metal fan up top, a mode stirrer. That swishes the wave pattern around instead of moving the food. But either way, it's the same idea. Keep something moving so nothing sits in a cold spot the whole time. A simple mechanical fix for a tricky wave problem.
Now, look at the door, because there's a lovely little trick hiding in plain sight. You can see your food spinning in there, so visible light is passing straight through the door to your eyes. But the microwaves are staying trapped inside, cooking. So how does one door let light out while keeping microwaves in? Look closely at the window and you'll see a thin metal screen full of little holes. That screen is doing all the work. It's a Faraday cage, a metal barrier that blocks certain waves. And the whole secret is the size of those holes. Remember, the microwaves are big. Each wave is about 12 centimeters across, roughly the width of your palm. Those little holes are way too small for a wave that size to squeeze through. So to a microwave, the screen looks like a solid wall, and it bounces right back inside. But visible light waves are thousands of times smaller than those holes. To light, each hole is a wide open doorway. It strolls straight through, and you watch your dinner. One screen, two opposite behaviors. And the only thing deciding which is the size of the wave versus the size of the hole. That's the whole magic trick. All right, a quick round of the microwave's greatest dangers and the real reasons behind them. First, metal. Why can't you put a fork in there? It's not that metal is magic. Smooth, thick metal mostly just reflects harmlessly. The problem is sharp edges and points, like fork tines or a crumpled bit of foil. The electric field piles up at those points until it's so intense it rips electrons out of the air, and the air itself sparks and glows. That's the arcing you see. Second, never run it empty. With no food inside, there's nothing to soak up the energy the magnetron is pumping out, so it bounces around with nowhere to go, and a lot comes straight back into the magnetron that made it, which can overheat and damage it. Always give it something to cook. And third, the sneaky one, superheated water. Microwave plain water in a very smooth, clean mug, and it can quietly climb past its boiling point without bubbling, because there's no rough spot for bubbles to form on. Then you pick it up or drop in a spoon, and whoosh, it flash boils all at once and erupts out of the cup. So heat water in short bursts and pop a wooden stir stick in first. Oh, and that glowing plasma when someone microwaves a grape? That's real. 2 grape halves act like tiny antennas, and the field lights up. Fun on video. Don't try it at home. So let's put the box back together and clear up the last worry people quietly carry around. Does microwaving your food make it radioactive? No, not even slightly. Microwaves are non-ionizing. And I know radiation sounds scary, but it just means energy far too weak to change the atoms in your food or make anything radioactive. It's closer to a lamp's light than to anything dangerous. And the moment you open the door and it switches off, the microwaves are gone, like a room going dark when you flip off the light. Nothing lingers. And here's a bonus you've probably got backwards. Microwaving is actually one of the gentler ways to cook. Because it's fast and uses little or no water, studies have found it can keep more of the vitamins in vegetables than boiling, which dumps those nutrients into water you pour down the drain. So, to recap, it doesn't cook from the inside out. The outer layer heats first and the middle comes last. It isn't tuned to a magic frequency of water. That's a practical engineering choice. It heats by wrenching water molecules back and forth until they jostle into heat. A radar tube makes the waves, the metal box scatters them into hot and cold spots, the turntable evens things out, and the door traps the waves but lets light through. You now understand your microwave better than almost anyone who owns one. And next time, we'll open up another everyday machine you've never really looked inside. Same curiosity, no hype, no doom. Just how it works. See you in the next one.